All right, guys. Hey, thanks for joining me today. Last video, we really talked and hammered on cover crops pretty good, why most people won't do it, why a lot of you guys shouldn't be doing it until you learn more and open your mind some. And so now let's start talking about why we should be doing cover crops. But today, let's just kind of talk about the soil, our soil structure, functioning soil, non-functioning soil, just kind of like what I've learned as just a farmer kind of going down this path. Let's remember, cover crops are a tool in our toolbox. They are not magic. They're not miracle workers. They're not cure-alls. They don't just happen. We have to earn it. We have to work for it. And so let's just take a chunk. So here we have some good living, healthy soil. Lots of roots everywhere, big and small roots. We got worm channels. We got soil life is why our soil is stuck to the roots. Earthy smell. Oh, that smells good. It's a little cold on my hand because I had to move a round bale and dig some up. And so it's a little cold, so it isn't going to kind of totally function like normal warm summertime soil. But we're just talking. So in normal soil, normal healthy functioning soil, what's going to happen is come springtime, a picture that we got some corn residue on top of here. So come springtime, our tractor drives on this soil and the lug lifts off. Well, what happened in this soil? Nothing, because the soil has resiliency, but actually a lot happened. So all these roots, all them worm channels, all that bug life, big and small pore spaces, they gave a spot for the soil particles to kind of shift, move, and wiggle around. And when the lug lifted off, all them roots pushed back out, and the soil particles were able to relieve. And so now they're not compacted. So it kind of alleviated compaction on its own. That's why we have resiliency. But with residue up here and all these roots, living and dead, and all the other life things, we also have water infiltration. We also don't have wind and water erosion and very reduced runoff. But now the tractor lug left, what's behind that? That's the planter coming along. We've got corn residue here. And so that residue is kind of like a layer. So when our gauge wheels drive across this, our gauge wheels aren't mudding up. If we got a cover crop on here that's green and growing plus residue, our gauge wheels are really not mudding up. And one big problem we have as farmers is we're always trying to push that envelope. We always need that one extra bushel. So we're always pushing sooner and sooner, but sometimes we need a little patience. But with that green and growing and that residue here, our planter isn't balling up with mud because we don't have muck. We have functioning soil that can deal with moisture. So we don't have muck. And then, so the planter comes across, everything goes okay. The hard part, actually on this soil, the hardest part is for the planter to close the slot because it's tough to stitch this soil back together. Come late summer, we got the residue on there. So when the sun is beating down on this soil, that residue is protecting that soil. Life is still going on. You lift that residue, you can see worm castings, you can see worms themselves moving around, doing their job. You can see microbial life working. And then the heat isn't being radiated back up to our crop. And so our crop is able to use water and to produce fruit. And so that's kind of just a quick gist of getting into this. And if we took and try and break this, I'm tearing it, but you can see it just falling apart. There is no hard line to this thing at all. So now we take our dead non-functioning dirt, and we got it's sitting there. We disc ripped it last fall. It's sitting there. This spring, we drive across it. That's what our soil looks like. Everybody's soil looks like that. Like that's normal. Well, that's sad that that's normal, but that's normal. There's no residue. There's not really any major roots coming out of it. There's very little worm life, very little soil life. And if we go to break it, it just breaks in hard lines, hard fracture lines. It doesn't just crumble apart. And and now with this kind of soil, when our planter comes across, you can see it's just muddy muck. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, muddy muck. You can't plant in it. You got to go stir it up again to get rid of that muck because it's just balling up your planter. And come summertime, with no residue, that sun is beating off this soil and reflecting back to our plant. So one, that soil is just absorbing that heat. So all that fertilizer we spread on top and then chased in with the digger is in them top couple inches. None of that nutrient is moving. There's no soil life in them top couple inches because it's too hot. They shut down. Your corn roots aren't growing through that soil. It's too hot. All that heat is reflecting back into the canopy of the crop, creating more heat to that crop. Now that crop is using a lot of its water and energy that day into just trying to relieve or cool itself off or get rid of some heat stress instead of producing a fruit. And so that can reflect into our yield. And that's why you have that's dead non-functioning dirt. That's not an insult, that's a matter of fact. How do we get from here to here? Primary tillage. Aggressive primary tillage is why we have no soil structure. It's why we keep getting, look at the history of agriculture, the diseases and the weeds and all these other, the lack of nutrients in our food, the cost per acre to farm, our dependency upon fertilizers and chemicals to grow a crop. A lot of it comes back to aggressive primary tillage. And so normally what happens in the fall, we take our disc gripper, and you picture that disc gripper going through that soil. And from a salesman's point of view, it's doing its great thing. But from the soil point of view, you're like, no, because you got your gangs up front, you got two discs up front, you got your big parabolic shank, so the discs up front are cutting and flinging that soil big time because we're moving at a good mile per hour. That parabolic shank is coming through. It's just boiling that soil up, throwing it, moving it around. And then you got another set of disc gangs, and then you got a harrow on the backside. You just completely annihilated that soil. And so there's not much for soil life left in that field. There's zero soil structure. And that is how we end up getting compaction. Our aggressive primary tillage is why we have compacted soils. The weight of your soil, I have heavy clay soil. It may be more challenging, but that is not why you have compaction. It's how you're farming that soil, how you're managing that soil is why you have compaction. And so it's the aggressive primary tillage. Where do the cover crops come in? So when guys are like, well, I'd like to get into cover crops, but where's my first return on investment? Simple. Your first return on investment is that you're going to stop the primary tillage. This is why I say start on a small piece so you don't have to freak out, and change is very difficult. And so if you have a small piece, we can easily just do that. And you're just going to monitor that fall, tile probe it and see where it is. Next year, tile probe it and see how it's doing compared to behind the smooth drum after the crop is planted. Tile probe your cover crop reduced tillage spot versus the other field. After 1 year, probably not much difference. In fact, your regular field might actually be a little bit better. But then by that fall, your second wave of cover crops has came into that cover crop test plot, and take the shovel out there and measure water infiltration, measure compaction, and soil structure. Are you starting to notice anything yet? It takes time. Cover crops to fix compaction is very easy. And if you fix compaction on your soil, you are going to bring a tremendous amount. All your other benefits are just by nature, by default, going to kind of come along with it. Improved infiltration, reduced erosions and runoff and things like that. I cover crop a little bit different than some guys because we don't have much of a crop up here, much of a season for doing much cover cropping. So in corn, I get out very early with a very simple cover crop. Corn itself is a wonderful plant for the soil. If we were just looking at a corn plant itself, massive, deep root system with, the top, foot, it makes just this beautiful big root mass. And so, I mean, it is just a fantastic root mass for our soil. You got this tons of residue on top of the soil for armor. Corn is a fantastic soil health plant. I know that sounds funny, but we'll go in early. I like to go in very early with just a basic oats. Just oats is my primary cover crop with oats, because the oats are going to hit every square inch and they're going to condition them top couple inches. And then we can bring in things like buckwheat. It's going to help free up some phosphorus. It's another set of roots growing in the soil. It's bringing in more soil life, and the soil life is a huge compaction fighter. We can bring in some of the root crops, like your brassicas, your tillage radish, or just radishes in general, radishes and turnips that just make that big fruit in the soil. And now you got this hole in the ground with a taproot down the bottom as a drain. And so think of the water that can get collected in them things and the life that gets around them. The brassicas, like the tillage radish, they don't do a very good job of supporting soil life, microbial life. If you pluck one out of the ground, the dirt falls right off the roots. I don't see, from a farmer standpoint, I don't see that they support micro life very well. But what they do support is worms. I don't know why, but around every tillage radish, it is just worm castings, and that soil is just built up around that radish, because them worms are just loving being around that thing. For whatever reason, them worms are just loving it. And but do not, that's why with tillage radish, do not just put in a strip of tillage radish, because you can actually hurt yield the next year. Always have like a cereal crop or some sort of grass crop to complement the brassicas or the radish type crops. I've seen it a lot of times. Guys will just do this brassica, this root, like it's supposed to really fix my field, and because we're so used to just monocropping, and they put that radish crop out there. The next year they put corn into it. And it's a bad corn crop. But I've seen it. So don't just do a monocrop cover crop unless it's corn on corn. That wasn't a joke. Kinda, but not really. But then we got your hairy vetch is just going to give some nutrients. Not much of a root system, but it's going to just bring in some nitrogen credits to kind of help give the soil life some nitrogen to feed on, to help break down residue and to put back into the soil. And it's another set of roots and soil life. I guess for me, that I keep it that simple. I might throw some annual ryegrass out there, because for us, I'm not too worried about annual ryegrass. Down south, there's guys that are like, no annual ryegrass here. That is a noxious weed for us down here, because they have a hard time controlling it, because the root system can get so big, they have a hard time killing it off. And so do your own research on your own cover crops, but it can be that simple. Just as oats, I look at a cover crop, that oats are my water, like my sprayer mix. Oats are my water, oats are my carrier. That is 90% of my cover crop. In that mix is the oat. It is literally 30 to 40 pounds of oats per acre, and you are talking 2 to 3 pounds of buckwheat, of radish, of hairy vetch, of annual ryegrass, of a clover or an alfalfa or something like that. You're just literally a pound or 2 or 3 of each other piece, and them are like your herbicides, your chemicals going on. And I get out, V3, boot high corn. That way, by the time the corn canopies, that cover crop is up enough that it might survive. It's got a better chance of surviving through that corn canopy time. If I was to fight compaction and just build soil structure in general, we can bring wheat into the rotation. I know a lot of guys are going to say, well, there's nowhere for me to go for wheat. Well, that's where you gotta start to pencil things in, depending on where you're at in life. For me, wheat can easily buy into the acres because I can say that behind that wheat crop, even if I just took wheat for grain, the wheat itself broke rotation. The University of Minnesota has countless data saying that corn and beans in a wheat rotation usually yield better. So if we take that improved yield and bring it back to the wheat crop, then that helps buy wheat acres on your farm. It also breaks up that ground. So behind the wheat, we can do maintenance to the field, but also we can do a soil building cover crop. You take the wheat off, just go in there with the drill and put in that soil building cover crop. And then next year, it's done all this work for you. And next year, you've got a lot of nutrients out there. You've got a bulk of your nitrogen credits. You've got pretty much all the P and the K that you're going to want. You might just have to do a little P and K in your starter, a little, you wean yourself down on fertilizer. Like your first year of doing a big cover crop like that, you can't just be like, I'm done with the co-op. Like, no, you got to wean your way down, do a lot of testing and stuff like that to try and start to figure out where you're at. But you started that system, but if we can apply a couple $100 of nutrient savings, again, back to that cover crop and that wheat year, as well as a few dollars of improved yield, and we've also reduced a lot of input costs on tillage, on primary tillage. Now we start looking at cash flows. That wheat has easily bought into the rotation. If we start to look at long term, where regulations are coming down, restricted use on fertilizers and things like that, that's going to be happening in the next 5 years, it is a zero-brainer to start bringing wheat into to have a third and a third, because if a 30-year farm is beans, wheat, and corn, then a 30-year farm, that corn needs to follow that wheat to take advantage of all the nutrients, because in a few years you're going to be regulated and mandated on how fertilizer is anyhow. And so that's kind of a scattered brain start into the cover cropping and just kind of a basic soil function. I'm going to end it right here. Did this make sense? Was this one stupid? You guys let me know. The one after this, we'll do another one of getting more into cover crops themselves and why we need to be doing it, and the other issues that cover crops can fix other than just compaction. And so, I don't know, I'll leave it right there, guys. Hey, thank you very much for joining me.